Hello and welcome to this special edition of DataChat Live. I am Cameron Cowan, your host, and with me as usual is Mike Fong. How you doing today, Mike?
Good morning, Cameron. I should say good evening.
Yeah, I get the rare opportunity to actually say good morning to you. I very seldomly.
Oh yeah, we've switched it around. So I say, do I say good? We now say good morning to each other right
Yeah,
now, don't we?
I'm in the AM. I think it
Technically.
counts. We wanted to give a little bit of special love and attention to a lot of our customers and other friends over in Europe specifically, but really anywhere outside of the Americas. So it's a little bit late for me here, still at headquarters, Pleasant Grove, Utah, but happy to say hello and good morning to everyone on that side of the world. And Mike, you brought along with you a special friend of yours from the London area as well. Is that right?
That's right. That's right. Well, we are delighted to welcome our special guest today, David Ellis. So David
Hi.
is founder and managing director of Station 10. David Ellis, why don't you say a few words?
Yeah, super. So Station 10 is a data consultancy. We help organizations make the most out of their data, particularly their digital and customer data. We have been going for 12 years, and I guess for a while, some of that time, right at the back at the beginning, Mike and I were working together for one of our long-term clients, and Tesco, and we've been good friends ever since. So
Well,
it's
David,
great.
you actually trained me up, or you were one of the people that trained me up right at the start of my digital and data analytics career. So I have a lot to owe you. And I remember one of our conversations back then. I was like, what is a digital marketing agency? What is Adobe, and what is Omniture, right? So those are probably some of the noobish questions I asked you first.
And it probably was Omniture at the time as well.
It was, yeah. I think they had been bought, but they hadn't rebranded it yet. We knew it took them a while to get through to that, didn't it?
Yeah. But as you say, we've learned a lot from each other, I think, over the years, and it's great to be part of this conversation. Well, thanks for, mostly outwards. No, I'm
Not referring to you personally. Station 10 has grown from you just as a sole contractor to how big is your team now?
We're about 30,
wow.
So grown quite a lot, which has been a great, fascinating journey, and part of the amazing industry that we're all part of. Seeing how that the data explosion has happened, and how that's evolved and matured over this decade, and as it will do over the next decade and beyond.
Yep. Long may it continue, right?
Indeed, yeah.
Excellent.
In many ways, this is just the start.
Yeah. So David, we know what you've been working a lot recently on Google Analytics, as many organizations in your position have been. GA4 is coming up. What's kind of happened? What have you seen?
So there's a few things I'd point out. So firstly, one of the big questions that we have a lot from clients at the moment is how do you make sure that the data you're using is delivering value, and how do you prove that? Again, that's something we've helped clients to do for a long time, but I think that's particularly relevant when you're thinking about kind of the future. So you're thinking about future proofing data for the next 3-5 years, and I think obviously given the GA migration scenario, a lot of people are thinking longer term about what the best solutions should be for the future. So I think that's really interesting. It's also interesting to see. As you say, we've done a lot of work supporting people migrating or thinking about their different options. There's still quite a few companies that are still thinking about it, even with kind of.
It's 2 months and 13 days.
Something like that. Yeah. So
I
think
18th, right?
There's some what's it called? Last minute.
Lastminute.com customers.
Yeah, it is a little bit. Yeah. Again, some of that might be strategic. Some of that might be, well, budgetary, I guess. Some of it might be, maybe with people are still evaluating their options. But it's interesting that maybe, there's certainly a group of people who have gone early, as it were, but there's still quite, surprising number. I thought. I think that.
Is it even possible to squeeze in a GA4 migration in the next 2 months?
It's a bit tight, yes. I mean, I guess there's obviously the slightly staggered approach, isn't there? So the paid for version is slightly later, so that probably accounts for some people. The free version is the one over the summer. The paid for version is kind of in the autumn. Even they, though, it's a little bit late, because you want some parallel running time to make sure the data actually matches. If you spot any challenges with the implementation, or with how more actually we've seen kind of with the interpretation of that data, what the differences are. That's something I think you want to give some time to, and make sure you're finding out. And that's where I'd expect most people to be right now. And again, there may well be people who have done that implementation, that migration, and they're going through those sorts of challenges.
It's not like anyone in the digital analytics industry ever asked, "Hey, can you just get this tracking done in a month or two?"
Yeah.
That never happens, right? So David, you touched upon the paid version and the free version. You also touched upon parallel running, so you can do the comparisons. So one change that we've spotted, or more accurately, you actually told us about, for GA4 is the data storage policy. So Cameron, if you just let me share my screen, I'll bring up the actual Google help page. Let me just get those ready. So there's actually been a change, quite a significant one, to the storage policy. And essentially, if we just scroll down here, on Google Universal Analytics, you could set your user level and event level data to up to 50 months, or even just simply to not expire. So I hope you can see my screen there. But on GA4, it seems the maximum is 14 months. And so, David, you've been talking about this data storage actually itself driving a few more kind of changes to your strategy downstream. So tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so clearly, the vast majority of businesses will want data for longer than 14 months. 14 months, if you, in a sense, is the minimum you would want for, annual comparisons.
2 months of year-on-year metrics, but then after that, it's like, oh, what was our year-on-year growth 3 years ago, right?
Indeed.
3 months ago, exactly.
And
you can't do any modeling of 2 data points. It's still going to be linear extrapolation, right? You're not going to get very far with that.
Exactly. So that period, and again, it's maybe slightly subtle, because many businesses run sort of 5 quarters, don't they? And that's 15 months. So maybe that 14-month cutoff is
strategically chosen, perhaps.
Nicely put. But anyway, irrespective of that, if you're doing, as you say, any longer-term data analysis, you probably do want longer-term data storage, which means, in effect, managing or storing your GA data, your GA4 data, will start to actually cost. Now, again, it will depend exactly on what your data volumes are, and there are different ways in which you could store that relatively cost effectively, but it is nonetheless an actual cost that you'll have to start budgeting for.
So are customers limited to a Google Cloud platform and BigQuery, or can they use other cloud vendors and other database options?
So this would be the possibility that you could, you don't have to use BigQuery and GCP. You can use other data platforms. You can extract it out and store it elsewhere. Although I suspect, clearly many will stick with the Google environment, which is fair enough, and maybe part of the the logic. If you're already familiar with things like BigQuery, then there's a certain logic to that as well. But clearly, it does start to change the kind of the cost dynamics ever so slightly. Again, it might depend if you're using quite a lot of data, and if you've got lots of different data properties. You might have relatively many small data assets. I know several of our clients have got many different websites, none of which are necessarily that huge themselves, but actually collectively they start to add up. So if you're wanting to start to look for those sorts of analyses and those sorts of trends and the actions that you could deliver on the back of that, then I think now is a good time to think about the strategic implications of that and what the options might be, because it doesn't just have to be a GA environment, and you will obviously have to pay something now.
So it sounds like even those that have been used to a Google for free type model, that total cost of ownership has gone up at least notably from that baseline. At
least some, indeed. Yeah. I mean, again, it's difficult to account. So for some businesses, if you haven't got very much data, it probably isn't going to be a very large cost. But for some, it will start to add up a bit. So it is worth thinking about the different options that you would have. Yeah.
And David, obviously you've been advising customers throughout the last year or more on this transition. Are there specific business models or verticals where you see that need for more historical data and seasonality or time over time analysis crop up more often than others?
Well, that's a good question. So I would say clearly, if you're looking to do any sort of longer term analysis, particularly about customer behavior modeling, I get, fundamentally data science type modeling or data modeling to develop targeting opportunities or churn modeling or whatever it might be. Clearly, you're going to need longer than 14 months data to do that. So, because as Mike says, otherwise it's just sort of two data points. So you are going to need to think about that. So that's going to drive things like particularly financial services. Clearly for retail, as we were referring to earlier, will clearly look for longer periods than that for modeling. I think one of the other big trends we're seeing is B2B actually. I think in the context of what's happened over the last few years, again, I haven't mentioned travel. Like there's a whole series of other industries that actually are, clearly going to be modeling in a similar way. But I think with the impact of lockdown and COVID, I think B2B businesses have realized they can't just do face-to-face meetings any longer. And so actually a digital strategy has become really critical for them. And so actually looking at how you understand your customers through multi-channel environments, and digital is clearly going to be a really important part of that, is now a significant strategy for many of them. So I would say, and often that's maybe a bit too much of a, there are quite a large number of those sorts of clients who might be on GA because historically maybe the data hasn't been as strategically imperative as it now maybe is. So I think that's probably the big trend the addition I'd add. Sorry, Mike, go on.
I was just going to say, I have met with some B2B businesses or sales teams, and they've said, often they'll make one sale, like an order of, 1 million pallets of plastic pellets, and then that's it. And that's just a phone call to a long-time customer. So as you said, the need for a digital strategy has never been there. At most, it's a website with branding, about us, and maybe a lead generation form, but most of it's been done over the phone, or in some cases, even fax. I have been offered a fax number recently.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah.
So with the shift in the total cost of ownership, and obviously there's also just a shift in the nature of the analytics itself. I mean, maybe what's the 60-second overview there, just for those that haven't been following along at home. The shift from universal analytics to GA4, it's a fundamental difference in the core platform, the way it does measurement, isn't it?
Yes. So I guess there's another general trend one can talk about here, which is kind of event tracking, I guess you can call it in general. And again, many of the analytics platforms are moving towards that kind of principle. So the idea that you're no longer thinking about sort of, well, clearly visitor metrics is a bit more of a challenge with cookies, but moving away from just page views, if you like. So you're on a page view is fine, but actually if you've got a single page application, then you can have many different interactions on that page, and actually that's the behavior you want to be capturing. So how do you move from page-based analytics, if that's the right way of thinking about it, often sort of marketing attribution analytics or marketing analytics, towards kind of product analytics, as you might call it. So how do you understand that actually I've built an app in effect for my customers to interact with, and I want to make sure that I'm tracking all of those different events, and then coordinating that with other channels, with the call center, with stores, if that's relevant for, you know, for the business model or whatever it might be. How do you start joining all those different points up? But clearly that event tracking is fundamental to how actually consumers behave now. We have built, the market has evolved to create apps, whether that's a My Account, you know, these are long-term customers you want to make sure you're keeping. It's no longer just a question for digital about acquisition, new customers, you've got to keep them now. So how do you understand that long-term behavior? And actually that requires you to track all of that activity. And so that is certainly a trend, and that is something that that GA4 is kind of based on, really, as are indeed, you know, other tools in the marketplace. So again, it's a very interesting environment now that actually there are more and more tools out there. It's no longer, if you like, just a two-horse race between the, you know, Google Analytics and then kind of an Adobe Analytics or Adobe kind of for the more enterprise level, which it kind of was realistically for many years. There were, you know,
it was the price, right? It was just a pricing tier. One is a, you know, kind of premium and paid, and then GA was the kind of free challenger, right?
And then GA360 was the you know, the paid for version, and they were always quite tightly aligned. Now there are more options.
Which options are you seeing crop up most of the customers you've been working with?
Yeah, so so as I say, there's different ones. Clearly, you know, Adobe is still an option. So again, for the more enterprise market, that's something that, and actually we have seen people switching from GA to Adobe in the last year. So that is, you know, that is a thing. Again, another challenge I think has been the compliance piece, particularly around, you know, GA and some decisions in the European Union. So there is also kind of a compliance use case that I think for some companies, particularly in the EU, is a consideration. So there are tools like Matomo who are focused on kind of a compliance positioning. So, you know, much more around making sure GDPR compliance and the data stays in the EU. So it's making sure that it's not being shared. And so it, you know, is GA, GDPR, I should say, compliant. So I think that's certainly another trend. I think for those that are really concerned about compliance, that's a consideration. So if you're positioning particularly around security or whatever, that's important. And if you're, you know, very close perhaps to you know, if compliance is a particularly important part of your business. And then I guess the others would be Amplitude has definitely grown quite significantly over the last 18 months, 2 years. Again, also from a European point of view, there's a big focus there. So I think Amplitude is again more around the idea of product analytics that we were just talking about. And then the other consideration I'd add would be things like Snowplow, which is a more technical, much more flexible tool that allows you to basically custom build any interaction, any measurement you would like. So it's it's more of a sort of technical platform than an analytical platform, but it does allow you to then capture that data, and again that can be stored wherever, so that again can be fed into a sort of
David,
GDPR compliance.
obviously this GA4 migration sort of, or maybe this more likely this GA 360 kind of deadline has forced the hand of a lot of companies. So far you've spoken about organizations switching to a kind of a like for like client side solution, GA4 or a Matomo or a Piwik or an Adobe.
Yeah.
In your experience with all the clients that you've worked with, how many of them have you seen switching over to something like a server side solution?
So again, that's a good point, and we're seeing that happening as well. Again, not necessarily in vast numbers, but it's yeah, that was the word I was thinking of, but it is certainly happening. Again, I can think of 2 or 3 clients who are either on that journey or considering that journey at the moment.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily change some of the the obligations you have. It just makes you still have to make sure the data is GDPR compliant and you've got consent and all those sorts of things, but it does mean that you are more in control of your of the environment that the data is being captured in. Yeah.
And have you seen many I don't know if this of the small number of clients of yours that have gone down that route, I don't know if many of them have opted almost for like self-hosting, or whether they've gone for a third party but still in the still in EMEA kind of servers. Do you have any opinion on that or any commentary on that?
Again, it's going to depend on the exact nature of those requirements. So again, I'd always start from that. But it's certainly a consideration. Yeah. I'm not sure about how many people are thinking about hosting it themselves. I think the ability to have private cloud or something like that, or putting it in the cloud seems to be a significant trend in general. But being able to say, actually, I want these servers to be in a particular location, I want that to be sort of guaranteed, that is certainly something that is happening more.
David, you mentioned a couple of times this concept of compliance and how that is a consideration for a lot of folks as they're deciding where to go forward. As the American on the call, help fill me in a little bit. What's the sentiment that you're hearing over on your side of the world as far as, is Google and Google Universal Analytics was what was originally there when a lot of the regulations came about. There's been enforcement activities in at least 4 or 5 different countries now. What's the general sentiment toward not only old Google, but new GA4? And is it any better or on any better footing than what we've seen regulation kind of hit against there in the last couple of years?
Good question. I would say it's on a better footing, yes.
Okay.
In that you can start to select
consent
exactly
mode, right?
how the data is consent mode. There are, I think, that said, there are some open questions as to exactly what consent mode actually does. So I think it's better, but maybe not perfect in that sense. I suppose the other consideration here is the Privacy Shield negotiations that are sort of continuing. So I think there is also a sense that that's likely to happen at some point, although that deadline seems to be extending out. So the idea that the Privacy Shield is brought back in, so the Biden administration is discussing with the EU as to how that can be put back in place to guarantee.
I've got a whole conspiracy theory based on global geopolitics around that. We haven't got time, but it's all political. It's all political.
Yeah. So anyway, that's taking a while, and I think there are some people who are thinking, well, that maybe that'll help at some point. But for others, as I say, like those that are considering Matomo, they're saying, well, I haven't got time for that. So I just need to make sure that I can guarantee compliance.
I'm just going to find a local player that I know isn't an issue at all. They're way far from that line, so I'm going to go with them for the time being. Is that the sentiment you're talking about?
Indeed, yeah, and then I can guarantee that I am compliant with EU regulations. If I'm focused on, EU activities, then I need to make sure, or I've got EU customers, then I need to make sure that that's in place. So yeah, I think that is certainly that is certainly a trend. Again, I wouldn't say it's a universal trend. I wouldn't say everyone is doing that, but there are, as I say, companies for whom compliance, whether it's financial services or legal is particularly important area of the business, then that certainly is something we're seeing more of. Yeah.
And David, I know Station 10 was one of the organizations that the UK government consulted with as part of its kind of data. I don't know what it's called, but you know what I'm talking about, like the data adequacy and how we drive the
data
UK
strategy,
forward.
Yeah.
That's it, the data strategy. Without giving too much away, can you tell us, like, would organizations in the UK think, stick more to the European side and say, oh, it's, Google's illegal according to those European DPAs? What should a UK company's positioning and situation, what should they be thinking?
That's a great question.
Like future-proofing wise as well, right?
How long have you got, Mike? So the UK is currently going through its, I guess, it's creating its new law around this. It is likely to be aligned to the EU's thinking, but probably a bit more. There are some challenges with how the EU has implemented some of the, it's pretty blanket. Everyone has to comply, and so I think there is a pragmatism, I think, that the UK is wanting to try and put in place, which says actually, one example I think, which even was mentioned in the strategy document, was, does the parish council of a church that's got, a few email addresses that it sends out to its parishioners every now and again, does that really have to comply with full EU legislation? Does it have to have a data protection officer, etc.? Using that as a particular example, I think there's an element of the UK thinking being, well, let's be a little bit more pragmatic about this. So it's still important to make sure that we safeguard consent and we make sure that data is protected, but how does that balance with making sure that All Saints Church somewhere can manage to not have to appoint hundreds of people.
Keeping those effective measures in place where they can prevent the most damage, right? We're talking about databases of millions of emails or credit cards, rather than mom and pop shop, or, as you say, a church mailing list, or something small, like less than 100 people, less than 50 people.
Yeah. Again, at the other end, and maybe this is, there's also the I have forgotten the name of the new act that's coming in, but another one which is focused on kind of the big five, the big data businesses, Meta and Google and so forth, making sure that actually there's management and making sure that the data is managed there correctly, so you're not having AI models riding roughshod, if you like, over data.
You've just touched upon another potentially huge topic that we could spend.
Oh no!
Well, no. My point is that that is an active area of legislation that the UK is actually bringing in. That's a little bit further advanced, that particular legislation.
Yeah, I was referring to AI and all the pros and cons of that. Okay, David, we're coming into the final few minutes. So we had one, next topic to move on to. Back to the GA4 point is clearly, as we say, that 14-month data retention is going to force anybody, well, most organizations that have, anyone from a medium organization upwards who is doing a bit of year on year and trying to drive that customer loyalty, they're going to be investing more. they're likely to be investing more in at least data storage and hopefully the analytics capability than they were before.
Yeah.
So how do you focus? How should those customers who are new to kind of spending that much money on analytics focus on getting a good ROI?
Yeah, great question. And I think this actually, to flip it around, starts to become the opportunity rather than the challenge associated with the GA4 switchover. So data is often an enabler, which is to say the value is often generated elsewhere. The data itself doesn't create, unless you're building models, doesn't necessarily deliver the value itself, but it is fundamental for people to make the value. So for instance, making better decisions is based on having good data in the first place. It is the decision that actually delivers, unlocks the value, but you couldn't make that better decision without the better data. Driving better customer experiences. So there's a series of areas in which if you're, clearly if you're spending money, you're going to have to justify that expenditure. So increasingly, you're going to need some sort of value framework to articulate back to the business how this is going to deliver ROI, as you say. The way to start that, I would say, is there are, as we found at Station 10, there are clear categories of areas that data can deliver. Better decision making being one of them. Increased revenues could be another one directly. So what you can do is you can start building out that framework and say, actually, these are the areas in which we can deliver value. And from that, you can then start to quantify specifically, okay, it's this type of activity, how many better decisions are we going to make this year? Okay, well, in that case, we can start to quantify how we're doing against that.
David, so, I'm smiling. I'm just imagining you going into a client meeting one day and saying, all the decisions you made in the past last year, most of them were bad decisions. Thanks to data, this year, you've made 50% fewer bad decisions. Well, that's the power of data.
Indeed. Well, it's a good question, isn't it? Because how do you
communicate the importance and the benefits of good quality data, of collecting and storing and activating that data correctly, right? How do you convince someone that they've made a better decision than they otherwise might have done?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, there's a couple of things around that. So you can be better informed, certainly. So again, there's a value framework which I think one can build out if you're looking to do that, and also then potentially even one can run an assessment on, as you say, as to how you're actually tracking that, how are you making better decisions. It is one of those things which someone could say, no, I just knew that.
I went with my gut.
Yeah, I went with my gut, but it really helped you having that presentation that you told me all of the information in beforehand. As I think you and I probably both, Mike, over our years have probably been experienced. So I would certainly put a framework together, and we have a value framework that we use here. So I'd be happy to share that with anyone if they're interested. And also then another interesting thing we've been doing is also doing a capability assessment. So actually, how do you start to deliver that capability? How sophisticated are you? What could be the next steps that you would want to be doing on your data maturity journey? Again, that's something we can speak to people about as well. So yeah, I'm very happy to share the framework.
Awesome. We have a customer, well, not a customer. We have an attendee, Dewey Williams. I'm saying that right? Is definitely interested in that framework.
Yeah.
So thanks
Super.
for
we can send that
in the
afterwards.
comments, Dewey.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah,
So David, one.
Oh, go ahead,
Cameron. Lag. Right, David. So in terms of customers moving from GA360 to GA4 plus a bit of Google Cloud Platform, that GCP element opens up a whole load of new doors for them in terms of what they can do, right? They can plug in other data sources. Presumably they can do cool API driven stuff and integrate with Gmail or single sign-on, all that kind of stuff. What else how else can customers activate and benefit from moving to a GCP or some other kind of cloud storage?
Yeah, so I think that's a great way of thinking about it. And again, this is where I think, to your point earlier, this is the opportunity. So I would think about this as, if you like, a starter kit for a customer data platform. So if you think that actually you've got a data collection layer with your analytics, that's then feeding into an environment like BigQuery or GCP, where you can bring in other data sets, where you might be able to merge that, integrate that data together. So what sort of analyses could you be doing there, and can you start to build out, if you like, a customer data platform? And I think that's where GA4 or the GA4 plus BigQuery plus GCP starts to become a really interesting place. It's maybe not a full customer data platform compared to, I know there are hundreds out there, but I think it's a really interesting way of saying, actually, maybe we can start with this and build out what our use cases are, and use that environment to bring in relevant data to come up with those messages. Can you then target customers more effectively? What other data can you bring in? What insights can you deliver? And I think that becomes really interesting, because it suddenly broadens out how you can think about your data. If you've been using GA or GA360 historically, it's always been, well, I have to extract it out and then maybe I can start to analyze it somewhere else. Well, actually, maybe the other way of thinking about it is, well, now I've got other data that I can pull in to this environment and start to build out how I then action on the back of that. And does that feed into optimization programs or targeting programs, personalization, which could then feed into your whatever optimization tools you might have, or your targeting tools. So there's a really interesting opportunity there to integrate those different opportunities, strategies. So I would embrace this. I think this is a great opportunity to think beyond the capability that many people have been, historically we've just had GA.
Open your mind, right? It's
suddenly,
not just analytics.
What can you
it's
do?
Like,
yeah, gone are the days that analytics lives in a silo. And you said that you don't think that's really getting into a full CDP, but what you just described to me sounds like the foundations of building out a full CDP. So I think it's definitely headed in that direction. Okay, so we're a little past the bottom of the hour, but I want to ask one last question of you, David, and that is, if my calculations right, 73 days out from July 1st. If someone's listening in today and they just missed the boat, they weren't getting the memos and all the alerts and everything that's been happening for the past year, maybe more, is there anything they should do today to accelerate their dives, so by the time we get to July 1st, they're not in a terrible spot?
Yeah. So depending on how many memos or they may or may not have been, certainly flag this as to the board, to as senior as you can get. If again, one of the challenges potentially has been budget recently, but clearly if you're going to lose the data, this is a fairly fundamental risk. And a few years ago, that was one of the main drivers for people to switch in the first place. We've got to have the data, otherwise the business starts to struggle. So that might be the starting point. I'm hoping people are further along the journey than that. So I would certainly be accelerating the implementation and what the requirements are for the future. So I guess let's break that down. So establish exactly what your requirements are. That is the most important piece. If you're a bit behind, then don't panic. Make sure you're getting the requirements in place, because actually what really matters is what this looks like in 3 years' time, not what it looks like in 3 months and 3 days. So make sure you're getting that in place. but then be ready to move fairly fast if you need to move the data across, and move that across to wherever it might be. And do think, if you like, outside the box, because that is the opportunity here. The value, how do you deliver the value, is really what the question will be for everybody this year, because of the pressures everyone is under. So make sure you're establishing that. So that would certainly be, have a conversation with the board, establish exactly what your requirements are, and then implement. Again, the implementation, ideally you'd want a parallel run for a while. So this is getting a little tight. But there will be. We've seen some people with having to reinterpret their data. What they understood the data was telling them previously wasn't necessarily what GA4 was doing. So there is that requirement to understand that. But
I do think people get hung up on, why is my GA4 number not exactly the same as my GA360 number, right? So like to anybody who is watching this, please know that it doesn't matter if your GA4 number and your GA360 number are not exactly the same. Like if you have a 5%, 10% discrepancy, that's fine, as long as they are trending the same, right? That is what matters. Obviously, if you have a factor of 2 difference, as we've seen in one example, then that is something to worry about. And also, David, what I'm hearing from you is, even though it's late in the day, take the time and plan out your future tracking needs and beyond, in terms of what else you could do. Don't let 1 month or 2 months of lost visitor tracking make you put in place something expensive and not fit for purpose, right? You'd rather just say, look, we missed a boat. It's taken us longer than we needed to. We haven't been able to parallel run, but we now have something that is fit for purpose. Now, say as of Q3 this year, you have something fit for purpose going into the next 5-10 years of your strategy, then actually suddenly you're missing the boat this year isn't going to seem so significant, right?
I think that's exactly right. Yeah. And if anyone on the call wants to just chat stuff through, I'm very happy to just be an advisor, if you like, on the end of the phone. If you just want to chat, I've got this kind of challenge, I'm very happy just to be a counselor, if that's the right way of thinking.
Well, I've got your phone number, David, so I'll share it out on LinkedIn and all the social, TikTok and Instagram. Yeah.
And you've definitely got the experience over the course of the last couple of years. I'm sure a great resource. You mentioned a few frameworks and things. David, if people wanted to get a hold of you, where's the best place to reach you? Are you on the social medias? Where can they find you?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn, so I can share my LinkedIn here, and my email address is david.ellis@station10.co.uk, which I can also share with people. So I can, that's the best place to get me, and I'm very happy to pick up any of those conversations. Let me just add my
you can ping that in the chat, David.
Put it in the chat. We'll also make sure it's in the show notes.
I haven't shared it with everybody. Let me try that again. There we go.
There we go.
Awesome.
Excellent.
Well, David, absolutely appreciate you taking the time to spend with us today, your expertise, the insight. It's been great for me to hear about the journey you've had with the clients you've been working with and the trends you're seeing. On behalf of myself and Mike, appreciate it. Hope to see you soon. And for everyone that's online and watching this, thank you for joining us for another Data Chat Live. We hope to see you soon. Take care, everybody.
Just one last note, Cameron, is David, you'll be at Adobe Summit towards in EMEA in London at the start of June. So if anyone is in the audience here and is going to be at Adobe Summit and wants to talk to David Ellis, you can definitely catch Station 10 and David Ellis at Adobe Summit.
Yeah, please do, and get in touch. I can share the framework as well. So yeah, thanks so much for your time. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks, Cameron.
Take care.
Good night, Cameron.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.